to Rowdy Reads in our journey into the King's Quest Companion. Well, we have entered the 6th chapter, which is, for now, the final chapter at our disposal. I do hope to one day be able to obtain a copy of the 4th edition of the King's Quest Companion, which contains the story for King's Quest VII. Especially from what I've heard about how they interpret that game's story into the Daventry universe. It sounds like that's going to actually be a lot of fun. Hopefully someday. But for now, let us get started with the 6th edition, Heir Today, Gone Tomorrow. By rights, these should be Alexander's own words that you read here, to be entered in the histories of both Daventry and the land of the Green Isles. They are not. A few days before his wedding, Alexander came privately to me in the room I occupied in the Palace of the Crown. How I came to be there I shall relate at its proper point in this narrative, in a state of far more agitation that could be accounted for by a groom destined in a few days to embrace his beloved bride. "I can't do it, Derek. It's impossible," he burst out. "I'm not you. I'm not my mother. I'm not even our stuffy old court chronicler. I've tried and tried, and it's beyond me." Shamefacedly, the young prince placed a bundle upon the table in my room. It consisted of a pile of battered vellum sheets covered in Alexander's crabbed hand, and a number of curious objects, among them an empty bottle, a large key of golden bone, and a curious and very large gleaming black feather that suggested the pinions of that of the great beast of legend, Nightmare. I tried to write down what happened here, you see. Mother and Rosella are demanding all the details, and Father and King Caliphim say that the story has a place in the court archives of both kingdoms. And I have tried, Derek, but see for yourself. I lifted the first sheet of vellum and quickly scanned the crossed out and written over lines. It was as I had feared. Prince Alexander may be a magician and a scholar, but alas, he is no writer. I'll admit, it needs a little work, I acknowledged candidly. The wedding is tomorrow. I could work on it till the sun rises in the Isle of the Dead and it would still be gibberish, Alexander groaned. Derek, I have no right to ask it of you, but I would never have survived without your guidebook, and so it seems right to ask you this. Won't you write out the story for me? I know all the facts, but when I put them down, they just seem to turn into dust. Write it and make it as real as on paper as it was for me at the time. I owe the people of Daventry and the land of the Green Isles at that. To tell the truth, my hands already itched to take hold of the threads of Alexander's strange story and weave it into a strong and colorful shape. For some years it has been my good fortune to be associated with the royal house of Daventry, King Graham, Queen Valenice, and their children, the Princess Rosella and Prince Alexander. I have, in fact, known Prince Alexander almost from the moment of his return to us, from years of captivity in the house of the evil sorcerer Manannan. Few among us could survive such reversals of fortune as have been Alexander's lot with the grace that he has shown. For it has always been my experience that, while many may handle adversity well, sudden good fortune can be the unkindest gift of all. Alexander, in fact, still often thinks of himself as Gwydion, and wears the persona of Prince Alexander of Daventry as another man might wear a cloak of ill fit. Young Alexander, however, survived the discovery that he was not, as he had been raised to believe, the slave Gwydion, property of the wizard Manannan, but, in fact, Prince Alexander, heir to Daventry, with a family and friends who held him dear. Among them, I am proud to have him hold me as his friend. And so I promised Prince Alexander that this chronicle would be ready to enter into the royal archives on his wedding day. And though I burned much lamp oil this night, I have kept my word. All that Alexander did and said in the Green Isles I have set down here, trying to include all of what he felt, and omitting what was not known to him at the time, for that information is rightly contained in other scrolls. In writing down Prince Alexander's adventures in the land of the Green Isles, I have reconstructed events as best I may, drawing on the extensive library here and my knowledge of the land of the Green Isles, and making allowances for the prince's, at times, excessive modesty. And now, the day I always hoped for has come, and I am to share with you of Daventry and the land of the Green Isles the strange and glorious tale of how the wedding of Prince Alexander to Princess Cassima that we celebrate this very day came to pass. I go now to hand these pages to the royal archives of the Isle of the Crown, so that copies may be made, and thence to the wedding. The events that were to lead, in the end, to Alexander's wedding day began several months before, and as good a place to begin as any is with the day that Alexander came to my home, once the house of the magician Manannan, to seek my help. It seemed that one day not long before, as he was looking into the magic mirror that hangs in the great hall of Castle Daventry, Alexander had seen that which disturbed him greatly. This mirror is one of the 3 great treasures of Daventry, and is said once to have belonged to the magician Merlin. Its property, as all Daventry knows, is to always show the truth, whether of past, present, or future, and as Alexander gazed into the mirror, he saw a vision of Princess Cassima of the Green Isles. It is ever Alexander's way to speak little, and never of those things which lie closest to his heart. But it was I who had written the pages of the court chronicle dealing with the foul attempt of the wizard Mordack upon King Graham's family, and I who had heard from King Graham's own lips of the bravery of the beautiful raven-tressed princess who aided Graham to rescue them, though she was a slave in Mordack's hands at the time, and in constant peril of her life. Though Alexander had only met Cassima briefly, and Alexander spoke little of her afterward, it was plain to the eyes of experience that an attachment had already been formed between the 2 young people in the brief time they had spent together before Cassima returned to the land of the Green Isles. This alone might have explained Alexander's eagerness to visit there, as he had promised Cassima he would, but the story he related to me upon his visit had even graver overtones for Alexander, and, as it befell, for all of Daventry. It seems that when the magic mirror had displayed her, for reasons of its own knowing, Alexander had seen a vision of the Princess Cassima that showed her to be, although not in immediate danger, still in some sort of trouble that she was ill-equipped to defend herself against. Alexander was resolved upon going to Cassima at once, and while his ship was being prepared, had come to me to see if I knew anything about the land to which he was going. It was my great joy to be able to be of greater aid than perhaps Alexander had anticipated, though little could I do to relate my own impressions of that strange and wonderful land. For in my youth, I had been tossed by waves to the shores of the land of the Green Isles, and had produced a small atlas, a guidebook, really, distilling my experiences in that odd, lovely, and unknown corner of our world. A small edition had been printed, but out of respect for the wishes of the King and Queen of the Isle of the Crown, the book had never been offered for sale or perusal. I felt a small glow of pride that, at last, my words would be at last read, and indeed, the very next time I was to see Alexander, he told me the little book saved his life on more than one occasion. Armed with the guidebooks and sundry gifts for Cassima and her family, Alexander boarded his sloop, the Johannes Bay, and set sail for the land of the Green Isles. That was the last day any of us in Daventry saw or heard for him for some months. The waiting preyed upon us all, though, of course, it was worst for King Graham and Queen Valenice, and for Alexander's twin sister Rosella. But through all that long wait, no matter the dire sayings of doomsayers who were certain our prince was lost forever. Those of us who knew Alexander best never despaired that someone as resourceful and clever as he would win through in the end. At last, our faith was rewarded. One momentous day, we would gather together in Castle Daventry, for what cause I now remember not, when the news came that not only was Alexander alive and well, but he had survived as strange an adventure as had ever befallen on any of his family. It began with a shipwreck. The waters about the Green Isles are treacherous in the extreme, and it is those reefs and currents and eternal fogs which keep the realm secure from the intrusions of the rest of Daventry. These and the great storms which local legends claim to be the artifact of a great protective spell once cast to defeat all intruders. The Johannes Bay had been following the stars, sailing by a pattern which Alexander had seen but briefly in Merlin's mirror, one which sparkled in the skies beyond Casima's beckoning image. One moment, Alexander was standing in the forecastle of the Johannes Bay, the sloop that had been his home for the last 3 months, straining his eyes for sight of the land. The next, he was fighting for his life against the maddened elements of wind and water. I think, from Alexander's description, that the ship must have been much closer to land than any realized, and it was blown onto the treacherous reefs that dot the shallow ocean of that island country. Alexander remembers little of his battle for survival, until at last he came to himself, lying in the small sand beach of a rocky cove. The sun beating down on him was what finally awoke Alexander of Daventry. That, and the inevitable rasp of sand everywhere upon his tender skin. Slowly he opened his salt, sticky eyes and squinted into the blinding sun. Everywhere around him were the hot, bright colors of the tropics. He wondered where he was. Could this be the land of the Green Isles? Groaning, he got to his feet. The beach where he lay was covered with sea wrack, the remains of his ship. Of the captain and crew there was no sign, and Alexander spared a moment to hope that they too had reached safety. This is not the way I meant to arrive, Alexander thought ruefully. Everything he had brought with him was gone. Even his princely signet was missing from his finger. As he stared about him, Alexander saw a glinting at the edge of the water. Walking over it, he looked down and saw his lost ring, half buried in the sand. He took it and looked at it fondly. Alexander's signet bore a yellow topaz, and carved upon its surface were the royal arms of Daventry, a lion and a unicorn. His name and birth date were carved into the yellow gold that held the stone. And upon the inside of the band was a very special memorial. The date Alexander, then known as Gwydion, returned to Daventry at last. Alexander slipped the ring on his finger. The small recovery of some tiny part of his lost property cheered him. Perhaps other things will have washed ashore, he thought hopefully, but though he looked everywhere around the beach where he had found himself, all that he found was a chest that lay buried beneath a large timber. He moved the timber and opened the chest. Inside it was one small copper coin of Daventry, the profile of his mother, Queen Valenice, etched proud despite the coin's low denomination. Better than nothing, Alexander told himself philosophically. Pocketing it, he started up the trail to the island's inland. After a few minutes, he came to a fork in the trail. To the left, he could see a bustling village. To the right, an immense ornate castle built of golden marble and snowy white alabaster, with soaring towers and gilded spires. After a moment's deliberation, Alexander headed toward the palace. As he approached, Alexander saw something unusual about the guardsmen in front of the castle doors. As he got even closer, he realized what it was. The guardsmen were dogs, the guard dogs of the Green Isles. As tall as human folk, true, but dogs nonetheless, and bulldogs by their appearance. Alexander had reached Casima's home, after all. "Excuse me," Alexander said to the guard dog on his right. The creature turned toward him, its muzzle whiskers bristling suspiciously. "I'm Alexander of Daventry. I am here to see the Princess Cassima. I've traveled a very long way." "The princess?" Both guard dogs raised their pikes menacingly. "This is the castle of the crown, not the almshouse. The princess won't want to see the likes of you, beggar boy," said the first dog. "And don't try our patience with the old traveler story. There haven't been any newcomers to the Isle of the Crown since Alhazred himself," the second dog. And we're still not sure how he got here." Alexander was uncomfortably aware of his salt-stained and tattered condition. In their place, he wouldn't admit himself to the castle either. Then he remembered the signet ring he had salvaged. "I am Prince Alexander of Daventry," he said yet again, holding out the ring for emphasis. The lion and the unicorn flashed in the sun. "My ship was wrecked on my journey here, and I've come a very long way to see the princess." The dogs conferred a moment in low voices, and then one of them turned and went through the great bronze-bound doors. A moment later he was back with an impressive creature, who, from the splendor of his armor, could only be the captain of the guard himself. Unlike his minions, the captain bore the stately bearing of a collie. "Captain Saladin will deal with you," the first dog commanded importantly. Alexander stepped forward to the guard captain and repeated his story. The captain nodded wisely. "If your story is true, and you had best pray that it is, Prince Alexander, the vizier will wish to meet you. He takes a special interest in visitors," Saladin said in a low, rumbling voice. Following Captain Saladin, Alexander entered the castle of the crown. All around him he saw beauty, the carven archways, the tilted walls. Golden light spilled in through the high carved windows of the upper halls, and where it struck, the paving stones glittered. Saladin took him to the second floor of the castle, explaining that Alexander was to see the vizier in his study. The palace's delicate enameled beauty made Alexander feel even scruffier, and he began to regret just a little bit his insistence upon meeting with the vizier. At last, Saladin stopped before an ornately carved door and indicated Alexander was to precede him. "Abdul Alhazred, the Grand Vizier of the Isle of the Crown," Captain Saladin said. Alexander walked into the room. The vizier's study was a room filled with luxury beyond imagining, even to a high prince of Daventry. Incense curled up from braziers of pure gold. Rich hangings decked the walls, and magnificent rugs covered the floors. In the middle of all this stood the vizier, Alhazred, a tall, curious, dark man with a pointed beard. He was dressed simply in a plain red robe, and upon his head was a soft black cap embroidered with mystic sigils in silver. Far more magnificent was his personal servant, a towering, bare-chested giant in gaudy turban and bright pink pants. The servant looked closely at Alexander, and the young prince saw that his eyes were the burning gold of twin candle flames. "Greetings, Prince Alexander of Daventry. How sad that your long journey should have been in vain," Alhazred said. "I don't like him," was Alexander's first instinctive thought. He tried to remember everything Cassima had said about her father's vizier, but it did not come to much. Though it had been the vizier who first invited Cassima's captor Mordak to the land of the Green Isles, no one, least of all Cassima himself, had believed Alhazred knew how wicked Mordak really was. "In vain?" Alexander said. "I've come to see the Princess Cassima." "And that, my brave young friend, is precisely what you may not do. But I forget you have not heard the sad news. The princess's parents, King Califium and Queen Alaria, died while Cassima was a captive of the wizard Mordak. Naturally, she mourns them deeply and is therefore in complete seclusion, a tradition which I'm sure you'll respect. He was hard-pressed exactly to say what. He didn't no, sorry. There was something about Alhazred that made Alexander profoundly uneasy. He was hard-pressed exactly to say what. Certainly, he didn't expect Alhazred to fall all over himself to make Alexander welcome, but a little civility might help. Kind men are honest, and honest men are kind, was one of King Graham's favorite proverbs. It has been nearly a year since Mordak was defeated, Alexander pointed out. How long must Cassima remain in seclusion? And after her mourning period is over, Alhazred said, as if there had been no interruption, she and I will be married. Alexander stared at the vizier. But I thought, he began, and stopped himself. Young men think little and imagine much more. It was the dearest wish of her parents, the vizier said smoothly. And as we are both men of the world, I'm sure you'll understand when I tell you that your presence in the land of the Green Isles could well prove to present a certain awkwardness for which Cassima's sake I'm sure you'll wish to avoid. Alexander's head was spinning. Cassima? Married? And to Alhazred? He remembered her bleak, terrified face as it had appeared in Merlin's mirror. Surely she had not known of this when she wished for his presence. Perhaps she didn't know now. I must insist, Alexander began. But of course, the vizier said smoothly, I shall not stand in your way, nor keep you when you have such a long journey home to arrange immediately. And I shall certainly give your best wishes to my wife, in a couple of years or so. Moments later, Alexander found himself outside the castle doors once more, blinking in the bright sunlight. Run along now, Prince Alexander, one of the guard dogs said gruffly. We have our orders. You'd best not come back here again. Alexander stared at the door for a long time before walking away.